morning. Welcome to Matnair on Air. Jane Matnair, Greg Bach, Calvin on the board, and taking your calls at 844-967-2789, 844-96
Party.
Or if you're watching on the live stream on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, you can leave a message there as well. Very, very busy show coming up today at 10:33. Our friend John Russell, who lives in Wheeling, West Virginia, he publishes the Holler newsletter on Substack, and John has joined the show before. He covered, it's hard to believe, tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary of the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio.
Oh, my gosh.
And when that happened, John was on the ground there quite a bit, talking to locals and talking to folks, and we want to get a little update with John and find out what's it like now in East Palestine, because from what I understand, things haven't changed all that much.
Yeah.
And haven't gotten cleaned up all that much.
But the politicians have used it for what they've needed.
They certainly have.
Yep.
It's shocking that they tend to do that.
Yeah.
11:06, even though it is not Thursday, 11:06, Dr. Kristen Lyerly will be here. We're going to do a different segment with her, not public service announcement. We're going to talk about what a woman's worth.
What a woman's worth. What a woman needs.
All related to the E. Jean Carroll case. Recently awarded $83 million from the former president for defaming her. So that's coming up at 11:06. I hope you will stick around for that. Starting things off, though, I want to do a little weather prediction update. Everybody agrees.
We want to welcome Brittany Merlot to the live stream and to the call. Oh, no, she's not here right now.
She's not here.
Why is that?
Well, because Punxsutawney Phil
and
Jimmy the Groundhog in Sun Prairie
and
the Milwaukee County Zoo Penguins all agree.
Yep.
Nobody saw a shadow, so we're going to have an early spring.
Science.
With all of these scientific resources we have at our fingertips, we still like going with old superstitions because it's funny, I guess. Right? We've been doing this for decades, and everybody likes it. So I am very happy with the penguins, though, at the Milwaukee County Zoo. I think that's really funny.
I love penguins.
Penguins are adorable.
We need to do a show from the Milwaukee County Zoo in front of the penguin.
Well, they're working on a new entrance now.
Yeah.
For the Milwaukee County Zoo, so we can get working on that.
I think that'd be awesome to pick like five places that we love, and do 5 shows. They're all like in southeastern Wisconsin, so like Milwaukee, Racine, Kenosha, and then just do a show from each of those places.
Lots of travel plans.
We have so much ideas.
We have so many ideas.
The best ideas. I have the best ideas ever. My ideas are I have the biggest brain for ideas. I'm done.
Okay.
All right.
We're going to start, though, with maps. Maps are still in the news. 2 consultants hired by the Wisconsin Supreme Court said redistricting plans submitted by the GOP-controlled legislature do not deserve further consideration.
I'm sorry.
Youch. The report that came out yesterday on the 6 map proposals that were submitted says the plans submitted by Governor Evers, Democrats, and academics are all tilted toward the Republicans, but are competitive enough that the party that wins the most votes will win the most seats. What an odd thing.
Yeah.
The one with the most votes would win the most seats.
That's what I think they call, in map-making parlance, fair maps.
Consultants Bernard Gruffman and Jonathan Servas, these were the 2 experts that were hired, did not recommend which Democratic proposal they thought was better, finding that none was dominant when it comes to political neutrality. But they did, again, point out in their report that came out late yesterday that the proposed maps from the GOP lawmakers and Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty would essentially stop Dems from winning control of the legislature unless their candidate at the top of the ticket does well above a simple majority. This kind of insulation from the forces of electoral change is the hallmark of a gerrymander. To put it simply, geography is not destiny.
Also, little known fact, both maps submitted by the GOP and Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, done in crayon.
They were not done in crayon.
They were done in crayon.
But they were not contiguous.
A lovely burnt umber.
You know your crayon colors.
I know my crayon colors. At least I know burnt umber.
You had the 64 box, didn't you?
With the pencil sharpener.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Yeah. They were not written in crayon, but they were not contiguous. Yeah. And when we talked to Dan Schaefer last time, essentially, and that is in the state constitution that these districts have to touch. They have to touch each other.
I'm really surprised that in the 12 years that the GOP has controlled this state, they haven't tried to change that constitutional aspect.
Well, it's been going so well for them for so long.
But just to cover their tookuses.
True.
That they wouldn't just say, like, we want to get rid of these things here. It makes map making easier in today's modern world. Oh, yeah, totally. But they didn't. So they really just shot themselves in the foot. And I used a metaphor that they will understand, a gun metaphor for the GOP leaders listening.
The will map, according to this report that came out late yesterday, had a substantial number of fails on the criteria. The map performed well on traditional good government criteria, including the best results on the splits of political subdivisions. The consultants labored the WILL map, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, as a stealth gerrymander. Wisconsinites want fair maps.
Yeah.
We want a fair fight. We don't want one party to just be able to sit there forever and not respond to their constituents.
And what do they not like? What do Wisconsinites not like?
Cheaters.
There it is. I was trying to find succinct and low amount of words to say what I wanted to say regarding this earlier before we went to air. I think at the end of the day, the GOP stands to gain the most no matter what happens, and I'll explain it very quickly.
No matter what map we adopt?
Exactly, because they draw a map which is blatantly out of line with the Constitution and with what the map experts are looking for. Okay, they get to say they didn't like our maps. The liberals, the liberal courts, the liberals, they don't like our maps. Because every single map, as Dan Schaefer talked about it and that article says, favors Republicans still.
Every single one of them.
It doesn't guarantee a Democratic leadership. It also doesn't guarantee or even say in any way, shape, or form a landslide in favor of the Democrats.
Right.
So they're still going to hold on to power. They still get to whine, and they still get to try to push through all their terrible legislation. And I also made the point to you, I said earlier, I don't think they want total control, because if they had total control, I mean, supermajority, override the veto, that just is a bridge too far for them, because then they have to push through all this really unpopular, extreme legislation that's going to get them in even bigger trouble. So as long as there's a pen saying veto, or there's arguments coming from the left up in Madison, and they're still in power, they still get everything they want.
They still get to complain about it.
They get to complain, and they still get to run things.
844-967-2789, 844-967-2789. Mark joining us from Prairie du Sac. Good morning, Mark. Thank you so much for calling in. What did you want to say?
Yeah, good morning. I'd be curious. I haven't seen the maps yet that the Republicans on will submitted, but I wonder if those even met the standards of contiguous and compact, considering that looking at even at the national level, the map for our representatives do not seem compact. That they look very gerrymandered as well. The way they weave and split things up the way that probably shouldn't be happening. But I mean that the fact of the matter is the maps for at least 12, 13 years did not meet the constitutional requirement. I mean that. Of contiguous and compact, and the fact that they can't get around that. I mean, that's the point that I would have hammered home years ago. I mean, and use that as a cudgel on Brian Hagedorn's head, is that he should have recused himself the last time, because if I remember right, that he was actually Scott Walker's advisor on some of these issues on the maps, legislative maps. That the maps have to meet constitutional muster, and that goes down to like wards are supposed to be within the same legislative district. Towns and counties are supposed to be split up as little as possible. That counties aren't supposed to be split up. That it is just they should be based purely on geography and population, and recognizing the outlines given in our Constitution. That I think it's down like wards are supposed to be I can't remember. I don't have it sitting in front of me right now, but I mean that communities are supposed to be held intact and not supposed to be split up for some kind of partisan advantage.
Right.
And the fact that they would submit maps that kept their the incumbent safe is just an affront to the decision in the first place. It should be an affront to everybody.
But it's so funny that you say that, though, Mark. When we had Dan Schaefer on earlier this week, and we were talking about this, they didn't even follow the assignment.
No,
they intentionally did not follow the assignment that called for contiguous, touching areas and all that stuff. And it was just like, no, we're not gonna.
This is what we drew, and
this is what we want the assignment to be.
Yeah. So thanks for calling, Mark.
Thank you so much, Mark. Anybody else want to check in on this? 844-967-2789. Again, this is not a completely done deal. We just know that the two consultants that were hired by the Supreme Court essentially said these two, submitted by the Republicans and also the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, again, build in gerrymandering.
Yeah. They're not following the Constitution. They're not following anything. They're just doing it their way, which is, it's worked for a dozen years.
It's worked for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has. And life's been good for them.
Yes.
Now they're just, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to work a little hard. Makes me feel so bad. Got to get out of that hammock and find a springboard to the ladder of work.
Got to knock on some doors and talk to some people, not just the people who agree with you. Got to just
talk to all your constituents.
I want to see how this works for some of these individuals. This is going to be the first time for some of them ever where they're going to have to do the actual work of campaigning to convince somebody I'm the best person for this job, not just you have no choice.
Right. So. And again, we've said from the very beginning, I don't want either side to be cheating like this.
Yeah.
I just want it to be a fair fight. All right. When we return, MTG steps in it again.
She knows all the words.
I love words. We'll share our love of words on the way. Stay close. You're listening to Matt Nair on Air, coming to you across the Civic Media Radio Network.
Even though I'm in love, sometimes I get so afraid I'll say something so wrong just to have something to say.
Good morning. Welcome to Matt Nair on Air. Jane Matt Nair, Greg Bach, Dr. Slide on the board, taking your calls at 844-967-2789, 844-96.
Pasty.
Or if you're watching on the live stream, you can leave a comment there as well on Facebook, YouTube, and or Twitter. Coming up at 10:33, John Russell is going to be joining us tomorrow. It was the 1-year anniversary. It's really hard to believe of the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. That huge they ended up blowing up all those chemicals.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting to get an update from John, see what's going on in that part of the country. I know he's been traveling around quite a bit as well. So, John Russell coming up at 10:33. Also want to remind you to download the Civic Media app. You can listen to all the stations all across the state, all 20 of them.
How much?
It's free.
The app is free?
The app is absolutely free. And when you download the app, you can call in directly from it. So that's a nice little...
Or text us.
Or text us too. 844-967-2789. All right, I'm going to admit this right off the bat. I'm not proud of it, but it's accurate.
What's that?
I'm a word snob.
That's fine.
I like words.
I don't...
I think they're important.
I think they're important, but you're not the type of person who goes out of their way to make someone feel bad if they say a word incorrectly. Like in common conversation, you're not going to be like, oh, I'm sorry, you said that wrong.
I would like to think not.
Yeah.
But if I don't like the person, I would certainly probably point it out.
That's a whole other bag of chips there, Jane.
So this kind of jumped out at me yesterday. One of our favorite Republican politicians from
Tom
Georgia.
Cotton?
No, that's a whole oh boy. No, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Ah, yes.
Madge was calling for the impeachment of the secretary, Mayorkas.
Transportation.
Mayorkas, they want.
No, that's Buttigieg.
No, he's
Sorry.
the border.
Sorry.
Mayorkas is his last name.
I said that with such confidence, too.
And while she's talking about why he should be impeached for his failures at the border, this is what she had to say.
This historical evidence is overwhelming that the founding fathers intended impeachment to be used to deal with the commission of indictable crimes and the abuse of power.
Do we have to hit the dump button? Do we have to like blurb something out? Because I feel like the FCC might fine us.
Indictable?
I mean, that sounds like what she just said sounds like an indictable crime.
It's actually pronounced indictable.
Yeah.
An indictable crime.
Yeah.
Not indictable. Small thing. But then when you think about the fact that Marge was the one who brought in great big blown up pictures of Hunter Biden's private parts and showed them on the House floor during hearings.
And she accused somebody of being on like tweeting, and he goes, "I'm not on Twitter." She goes, "I think you are." Like she just does. Like it's just those individuals can't hear a provable no. No matter what you say to them, like no, Mr. Smith, my last name is Bach. Oh, sure it is. Okay,
right.
You know. So
well, obviously Twitter piled on her big time. She can't get Hunter Biden off of her mind, wrote vocal GOP critic George Conway. Melissa Peltier said, "We call that a Hunterian slip." Another person on Twitter said, apparently she can't read either. She needs her finger to follow along the sentences.
I'm sorry. That one,
You're
know
gonna
what?
give her a pass on that?
I'm giving her a pass. Some people, you know what? Some people read differently, and I'm not being funny here. Some people read differently. Their lips move when they read. They use their finger. They speed read. They slow read. You know, I don't care about that stuff. Indictable, though. I'm gonna say that. I'm gonna say that on accident today. I guarantee you. It's in my head like an earworm song.
Kevin, I want to hear it in her own lovely, mellifluous voice. Marjorie Taylor Greene yesterday talking about why Mayorkas needs to be impeached.
This historical evidence is overwhelming that the founding fathers intended impeachment to be used to deal with the commission of indictable crimes and the abuse of power.
You know, some guys walking up to...
I'm a bad person.
Some guys walking up to a lady in a bar somewhere and we're going, yeah, I can.
Papa Rico watching on the live stream. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Georgia's Southern Karen.
I'll go Southern Fried Karen.
Southern Fried Karen.
Yeah, she's a trip. I mean, she's part of that class, the
Freedom Caucus?
But like the Gateses and the Boberts and the her and the... I just want to see them bounced out of Washington while going, what do you mean?
I think Bobert's going to have a tough time.
Oh, I think so, too.
I think Lauren Boebert's going to have a tough time. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene, at least in her district, is pretty popular.
That's unfortunate.
I think they like her mispronunciations and all, which is fine.
Makes her
That's
more
not
folksy.
The worst mispronouncing a word is certainly not the worst thing that you can do.
I don't disagree with that as well. We all mispronounce words all the time. Not all the time, but we do. Yeah, I think Boebert, because I think moving districts was going to be her biggest mistake.
Absolutely.
Carpetbagger.
Absolutely. And she just came in fifth. They just had their first debate and I don't know that we ever got the chance to mention this, during that debate in Lauren Boebert's new district in Colorado, they asked how many of them had been arrested. And out of the 8 of them, 6 raised their hands and then they high-fived each other.
Yeah. Yes, because that's the world we live in now where...
So that's a badge of honor being arrested for something.
Yeah. Yep.
The party of law and order, right?
Yep. The party of family values.
And backing the blue.
Yes.
High-fiving because they all got arrested. And Lauren Boebert was among those, too, because she's been arrested more than once. So that should put her at the... I mean, if we're going to use that as the scale, then she should be at the top of the list.
Good job, Colorado. Good job.
All right, interesting days ahead.
Absolutely. This is going to be a fun year, Jane.
Tony Zimmerman on the stream. Only criminals should be making laws. That's right.
Aren't they already? Oh, boom!
Oh, boom.
Social commentary.
All right. One other thing I want to mention, if you are a hockey fan, tonight, Minnesota at Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Starts at 6:30. You can listen on WRJN in Racine, 1400 AM, 99.9 FM, and in Kenosha at 98.1 FM. So hockey fans tonight, Minnesota at Wisconsin. That starts at 6:30. Stay close. We have news on the way next. We'll get a little weather for you, too. When we come back, John Russell will be joining us. Stay close. You're listening to Matt Nair on Air. This is the Civic Media Radio Network.
Change the attitude tonight. I run out of places to hide, and if that's how I feel, then it's the best feeling I've ever known. It's undeniably real. Oh, leave a tender moment alone.
Love is deeper than the holler, stronger than the river, higher than the pine tree.
Good morning and welcome to Matt Nair on Air. So very happy to have you along. Jane Matt Nair, Greg Bach, Calvin on the board, coming to you live from our studio in downtown Waukesha. You can always call or text at 844-967-2789 or leave a comment on the live stream if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, and or Twitter. It has been a while since we've had the chance to talk to our next guest. I know you had a lot going on in your life personally and also professionally. Delighted to have him back. John Russell publishes the Holler newsletter on Substack and lives in Wheeling, West Virginia. Tomorrow, John, I can't believe it's the 1-year anniversary of the derailment of that train in East Palestine.
I can't believe it either. By the way, thanks for having me on, but look forward to talking about it. Time flies.
It sure does. It really does. And Greg and I, before the show, and we had booked you for a couple of days ago, it honestly seems like it was longer than that. It feels like this train derailment, at least for people here, at least for me, it's like, oh, that happened 3 years ago. The 1-year anniversary is tomorrow. For people who aren't up on this, John, explain what happened.
Yeah, a year ago, a Norfolk Southern train derailed in East Palestine. This is Eastern Ohio, where I'm from. A lot of people get mixed up about this part of the country. This is 10 minutes from Pennsylvania, very close to West Virginia. It was carrying a number of toxic chemicals. Those spilled out into the environment, but what people might remember is that 5 cars of vinyl chloride were detonated, and this huge mushroom cloud over town happened. And then we all kind of watched the fallout from that. And here we are a year later, kind of looking back at the consequences for such a massive disaster. I mean, this is a really large chemical exposure, and we're a year on from it. And lots of aspects to the story.
It's a small community. It's right. It's only like 5,000-6,000 people, but the fact that they chose to detonate those cars is still mind-boggling.
Yeah, when my involvement with the story came from covering the rail industry on other aspects. There was almost a rail strike. That's kind of part of this scenario. You might remember, back in let me get my years straight here, but 2022, at the end of 2022, rail workers were thinking of going on strike because They were overworked. There weren't enough people who were conducting safety operations.
Right.
They were under constant pressure from management to do their job faster, to keep these, trains safe, that have a lot of aspects that you have to make sure are good so accidents like this don't happen. I was covering that, and one of the interviewees said, if we don't get better working conditions to make sure these trains carrying toxic chemicals through all of our towns, we're going to have a major disaster. And that was a month before East Palestine happened. So it's part of this larger safety conversation.
If I remember correctly, John, all of this started with the train industry, the rail industry. A new guy came in and put in a new set of procedures, and it was all about optimizing profit. Right? It's always about optimizing profit. And so that's when they really started cutting back on staff. They really started cutting back on these safety features in order to optimize the amount of money that they're making. And as you said, what was the ramification? A month later, a big kaboom, And I'm assuming that people in East Palestine are still dealing with health issues.
Yeah, 100%. What you're right about that. What you're referring to there is this business practice that kind of took over the rail industry at the behest of Wall Street, their major investors. It's called precision scheduled railroad, and it does all the things to jack up profits. It makes the trains longer. They're trying to have less people staffing the trains. Important safety inspectors. There are hundreds of points on a single car. And trains can be miles long, right? You got to inspect hundreds of points on a car. Each one, you're supposed to have 3 minutes as a safety inspector to do it. Precision Scheduled Railroad wanted you to do it in 30 seconds, right? It's all of these cost-cutting measures just to return more profits to Wall Street. And, East Palestine is now paying the consequence, definitely a year out, and will be for years in the future, yeah.
Have the residents of East Palestine been given any kind of satisfaction? I mean, did Norfolk Southern give them any kind of settlement or any kind of assistance at all?
They do. But what we're seeing play out in East Palestine is could be said of any major industrial tragedy. These are multi-billion-dollar global corporations. And the level of assistance that flows to a town that it experiences a disaster like this is ultimately a cost of doing business that these companies really plan for.
Right.
So what we've seen, they put millions of dollars into a city park. They sent, a couple kids in town they gave them scholarships to college, all of these there's a big PR push around this. But ultimately, it's tough to put the toothpaste back in the tube. They blew up rail cars. Close to 1 million pounds of a toxic chemical was incinerated, spilled into the air, into the water, into the soil. So what's the price that you put on that? What is the right measure of accountability? A lot of people in town feel like you can't put a price on the homes that they saved up for their life, or the things they have to deal with now.
John Russell is our guest. He publishes the Holler newsletter on Substack. He lives in Wheeling, West Virginia, and was very much involved in reporting on the East Palestine rail derailment that happened last year. Tomorrow, the anniversary is tomorrow. They ended up blowing up 5 cars of this highly toxic chemical. They must. I would be terrified to drink the water. It's lovely that North they put money into a park. Who wants to go sit outside?
Yeah. I think, this is what we are all kind of expected to accept, right? Anytime one of these giant tragedies happen, we get, a park out of it or something like that. But really, there needs to be a measure of accountability here. And, we keep talking about these train cars that were blown up. One of the things that I think, listeners, everybody should keep front and center is something that wasn't really, the tragedy of these things is that there's a lot of coverage in the first couple of days.
And then it all goes away.
Find out, it goes away, and you find out important stuff. One of those underreported things that we found out later from the NTSB investigation is that the chemical manufacturer of, that was the chemical that's being carried in these cars, was saying at the time, there isn't a big risk of these cars blowing up. You don't have to go out there and preempt the risk of these cars blowing up on themselves. At the time, that was the justification for doing this. There were temperature charts about these cars that came out later that showed at the time they were detonated, the temperature and pressure in the cars had leveled off and stabilized. And by the way, the morning when they detonated these cars, 5 of them were blown up. The morning of the detonation, they were only planning on 1. And the company added 4 other cars, massively increasing the chemical exposure here, in spite of what the company who made the chemicals said, in spite of what the temperature charts said about their risk of blowing up. And we still don't have a clear answer for why they increased that chemical exposure. And the last thing here that's important is there are guidebooks for doing this kind of detonation. They say you need a 1-mile evacuation zone for each car of this stuff. They made the 1-mile thing. They decided to add 4 more cars, but they kept a 1-mile evacuation zone. So those are important.
Is this all done? I mean, are there anything else working through the legal system or lawsuits or anything like this? Or is it just, as you said, John, it's the price of doing business? Oh, well, you're all going to have cancer in 30 years. Good luck.
It's always unfolding. You never say never, but I think we're seeing a lot of the same industrial disaster patterns happen. It takes years to know the consequences of this kind of chemical exposure. I mean, just think about it. Where's all that stuff go? Look at the mushroom cloud. Where did all of the byproducts go? You can walk down and kick a hunk of mud off of the creek bank today and watch the chemicals bloom in the water. I mean, people do that. So we're going to see the consequences of this for years. There are lawsuits in the works, but I think the question on everybody's mind is this the best that we can accept?
Well, and as I looked more into this, John, and you had talked too about the length of some of these trains, we're talking miles long. So if you're at the front of the train, you can't even see the back.
Yeah.
I don't know that. Again, we have trains that run through downtown Waukesha, but they're certainly not 1.5 miles long. But for people who don't encounter it on a daily basis, think about it on a daily basis, these things are moving all through the country all the time, whether you see them or not. These super long trains carrying all kinds of things. It may not be, coming through your neighborhood, but it's going through somebody's neighborhood.
Yeah, they're longer. There are less employees on these trains. The industry is having a higher turnover rate. The experts who stay on and have all the institutional knowledge are being replaced with younger guys that have less training and are paid lower wages. It's all part of this precision scheduled railroad that's jacking up profits for the industry. And it should be called into question.
844-967-2789 if you want to join the conversation. We have Tom from LA on the line. Good morning, Tom. Thank you for joining us. What did you want to say?
Good morning. First off, we the people ultimately are the government, and we must never forget that. There's only one thing that's really missing from this whole story, I believe, and that is the difference between private and public. Public means that we all own it, and it's not for profit. And private means that the private owner, and they can do whatever the hell they want with it, and they are trying to increase their profits. So that is the big difference, and I think that needs to be said. Is it John? I think John is on here, that it's a private corporation that's running this thing. And because of money in politics, they're probably influencing the referees on the field, so to speak. But there really needs to be a distinction between when something's private and when it's public. Because to privatize it means to profitize it. So I'd like you to kind of riff on that a little bit, John, if you can.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Always appreciate you calling, and thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, you know what, Tom? Glad you gave us that prompt here. One of the things that sticks out to me about this, and a consequence of these huge companies being completely private, run for profit, There is right now, the news is covering this aspect of the story. There's an effort by investors to remove Alan Shaw. But that only happened after the company missed earnings reports.
Oh, geez.
They're trying to remove him because, this costs so much money. Maybe if Alan Shaw had been more ruthless in his response and less, did even less for East Palestine, the investors would be happy. But as long as we have private control over major companies that have the public interest at risk when they carry these chemicals through our towns every day, we are at the behest of the interest of investors.
There was someone in a boardroom saying, "Why did we build them a park?"
They should be grateful.
Yeah.
They should be grateful we gave them a park. It's just also it's also highly disturbing. Sherry Manazi watching on the live stream says we wait 20 to 25 minutes constantly for the trains in Horicon. So that's got to be getting on a mile, right?
The morning train here in Waukesha
Waukesha
is pretty long too. I've gotten caught a couple of times, and if it's slowing down too, mother glory.
We're going to keep this conversation going. John Russell will still be here. You can always join us. Call or text at 844-967-2789. Leave a comment on the live stream on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Stay close. You're listening to Matt Nair on air across the Civic Media Radio Network.
Trees growing tall upon the hill. My love is purer than the snowflakes that fall in late December, and honest as a robin on a springtime windowsill, and longer than the song of a whippoorwill.
Dues. Makes me wanna holler, makes me wanna holler.
Good morning. Welcome to Matt Nair on air. Jane Matt Nair, Greg Bach, Calvin on the board, and taking your calls at 844-967-2789. Leave a comment on the live stream if you like, and if you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. John Russell is our guest. He publishes the Holler newsletter on Substack, lives in Wheeling, West Virginia, and has been kind of our correspondent with everything going on in East Palestine, Ohio, after that horrible train derailment that happened a year tomorrow.
Yeah.
Greg, you said you had a question for John.
Yeah, so we were talking, we brought it up, the aftermath of the entire event wasn't short of politicians coming into the town to not so much talk about the people and even talk about the event, but really point fingers at each other, tweet out campaign letters, complain, all these things, and not really give a lot of information either. In fact, some of them are spreading like conspiracy theories based off the explosion itself. What did the town feel after it all went away, as far as like the politicians, once they had used it for what they needed to get headlines, to do what they do? After the circus left town, where were they left besides having a park, some toxic chemicals in the air? It didn't seem like, the politicians were there to care. They were there just to use it, get the photo op, and get out of town.
I mean, sadly, that's where they're left. The media will come through and the politicians will come through. And then, people in town right now, I was talking to a couple of them just this week. One of them still put up in a hotel. She has a son that is, on long distance learning, who their therapists say, that's supposed to be a short-term thing. His socialization's affected. Lots of people are still displaced by this. If you're not still in a hotel, then you're going back into a house that you really don't have clear answers on.
Yeah.
I mean, the first tip of the spear here in cleanup was left to Norfolk Southern and the contractors that they hired.
Oh, that's really comforting.
Yeah, right. There you go. Sleep on that for a little bit. The EPA then came over and took over the reins, but even their track record is very spotty with industrial disasters. And I think that, brings up a question here, regardless of, what party the politicians visiting are involved in. Do we have too much corporate capture of every single party and institution that responds to this? You can look back at even a Norfolk Southern disaster, more than a decade ago, where 9 people died. And the communities there are kind of left with the same questions that have been put onto East Palestine. Everybody's kind of out there making their own decisions.
Well, and as you said, too, it's a small town. It's only about 5,000 people. It's not like they've got a lot of clout that they can go and demand things from their representatives. As we've been saying, politicians show up and use it for whatever messaging they want, and then they take off again. A couple people on the live stream had mentioned, John, the home. I mean, these people can't move. They're not going to be able to sell their homes. Who's going to buy a house in East Palestine?
Yeah, it makes me think of a person that did not make it into our coverage. We had a YouTube video that went pretty big on this. It's at 2.6 million views now.
Wow.
And, but it was good. But a lot of people we interviewed didn't make it in. And one of them was an 80-year-old woman named Linda that we met in this McDonald's that became the headquarters for all the journalists there. We all used the Wi-Fi. She moved to East Palestine. She lost her husband tragically. In that tragedy, she lost a lot of the value in their home, and she looked for a new start in East Palestine. And shortly after that, this happened. She's 80 years old. She already lost the value once. She was in McDonald's drinking water when I met her because her home smelled like an electrical fire. And now this 80-year-old person, how long does she have to wait for lawsuits to shake out about this, or for funds to be set up to compensate for the value of her home? She doesn't have a choice. She's just gonna go back into the house there. This is an aging community too, and a lot of people are in the same spot.
You're just trapped.
Yep.
You are literally trapped. And as you said too, John, litigation can take years and years and years. And if you don't have the money on your side, they can just bury it in appeals and drag it out. And I just watched Aaron Brockovich last night, and this reminds me of the same kind of fight with going up against a corporation like PG&E.
Well, I mean, and today too is like that's at least they ended up paying eventually, because now I feel like we live in a world where we don't expect the corporations to ever pay to everybody. They settle, but they never admit guilt, or they just walk away because no one wants to prosecute.
Or as John said too, they just build this in as their it's the price of doing business.
Yeah, exactly.
A couple derailments a year. Oh, we got that covered. You know, as far as the people affected by the derailments, well, that's not our problem. Yeah. We got a couple of minutes left, John. What else have you been? I know you've been really busy and you've been doing a lot of traveling. What else has been happening in the holler?
Oh man, well, I just love to involve myself in covering human tragedy. It's all sunshine and rainbows over here at the holler in Wheeling, West Virginia. These things are all kind of related, right? Greg, I wanted to go off of your point there, maybe wrap up this East Palestine stuff. It's true. We only send people to jail for the small crimes. The big crimes, the biggest crimes, we let those slide. We call them the cost of doing business. And you see it, DuPont, Purdue Pharma, pick any AIG, the financial crisis, right? We're all living in the backwash of this stuff. So yeah, I think at some point we all have to decide how much longer to put up with that. The holler we're going to be covering, keep an eye out for this in your cities. Homeless camp bans are sweeping the nation. One just passed in Wheeling. The city government, instead of fixing the massive potholes around here, used bulldozers to displace homeless people. But this is also related to a lot of conservative model legislation that's been sweeping. So look out for that story on the holler.
You can
we only cover happy stories.
Well, it's all, as you said, sunshine and rainbows.
Aren't
and
there any puppies you can talk about?
No, because it's going to be a sick puppy who has been drinking bad water.
Yeah, exactly.
You can find John Russell's The Holler newsletter on Substack. Really appreciate it. Thank you Thanks very much, John. We will touch base again in a couple months.
Thank you guys for having me, and keep it real out there in Wisconsin.
Will do.
News is coming up next. Stay close. You're listening to Matt and Air on air on the Civic Media Radio Network.
Oh, yeah! on the line. Holla, holla, we just like your style.